Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining. We're going to let the crowds of people keep coming in. Looking forward to it. Should be a great session. Fantastic. For everyone that is already on, nice to meet you all. I have to say, Andy Stone, you by far have my favorite picture right now. So I have to acknowledge that. My name is Becky with Apex. For anyone who could turn their cameras on, it always makes for a better event in the sense of at least we could pretend to shake hands. So hope you're all able to join, but we will give it about another minute or two. Hi, Jeremy. Thank you all for turning cameras on one at a time. Subhash, Andy, Victor, awesome. Okay. I always say, so I'm from New York. I always say people on the West are more inclined to turn on their cameras on a Zoom event. So I thank you guys for making me stand, continuously accurate here. I love it. But I will jump in. So my name is Becky, Becky Cooperhand with Apex Assembly. Thank you all for being here. We also have Alejandro Mortacini, our head of membership. And of course, our host for the afternoon, which is GitLab. Just a run through, of course, I'm going to assume everybody at some point or another over the past few months, if not prior to that, has used Zoom. Be active, use the chat. The goal of today is to truly interact, have a great conversation, walk away with some, thought-provoking ideas of things to bring to your teams, yourself. GitLab is a fantastic host. We have a really great conversation surrounding harnessing the development pipeline for scalable application security, led by Cindy Blake. We have a really great group of people here as well. So just to run through and hoping that you guys will all later on introduce yourselves and potentially be involved. But we have Alariza from Age of Learning. We have Andrew from Pure Storage, Bijou from Agility Logistics, David from Mauser Packaging Solutions, Don from Wells Fargo, Francisco from Avoya Travel, Gaurav from Fox Rent-A-Car, Jean from City of Hope, Gorky from Quest Diagnostics, Jeff from New American Funding, Jeremy from Avery Dennison, Kishore from Qualcomm, Krista from Caesars Entertainment, Luke from Scripps Health, Nemi from Pacific Dental Services, Remy from Nuxio, Sridhar from General Atomics, Cheyenne from FTD, Subhash from California State University, Sunit from Experian, Victor from DD Hirsch Mental Health Services, and Ying Ying from Assure. That was a mouthful. Thank you for letting me get through it. Of course, from our host, like I said, Cindy Blake will be our speaker. We also have Robert and Yu Chen. So I'm going to, at this point, lead it over to Robert to introduce himself. Again, looking forward to what should be a fantastic session and conversation. But keep your cameras open, be involved. Some people who in person might not raise their hand, become a typer, be involved in the chat if that's more something you're inclined to do. And I will leave it over to you, Robert.
Thanks, Becky. Appreciate the introduction and really appreciate everybody, taking an hour and a half out of their day to, get together with us here at GitLab and sit down and chat and learn a little bit about our security and what we're up to. My title is Strategic Account Leader. I'm in the Los Angeles area, so I work the Southern California market with Yu Chen, and happy to talk to you and answer any questions as we go through the presentation. I'm also a moderator, so I'll be helping out, coordinate things, and I'll turn it over to Cindy Blake for an introduction. She's going to be our main speaker today.
Thanks, Robert. Hi, I'm Cindy Blake. I've been with GitLab for just over 2 years, which in GitLab years is like a long time. So I'm excited. I have been in the security industry for many years. At one point I was with Fortify, so full disclosure, if I talk about them, it's because I was there. Let's see, I started my career as a developer, but I won't say which language because that dates me. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chen, for introduction.
Thanks, Cindy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yu Chen. You can call me Yu for short. It's all good. I'm based down here in Orange County, Rancho Santa Margarita. And like Cindy, I've also spent a good deal of time with various security tools. I will say what my first language was, and it'll date me. It was C++. So if there's any C++ programs out there, still a soft spot in my heart. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, we're ready to get started with the presentation, or is it back to Robert?
I don't know if anybody has any questions, or maybe there might be some things that you're trying to get out of the meeting today that you'd like us to make sure that we chat about. So feel free to either put those in the chat, or right now, if you want to unmute and ask a question, we're willing to take those questions before we kick off Cindy's presentation. If not, we'll jump right in.
Well, and if no one has any questions right off the bat, I guess my biggest one would be, what is your greatest challenge in shifting left? I think we've kind of provided some context that this is about enabling the developers to find and fix vulnerabilities earlier. Some people call that DevSecOps. Some people call it shifting left. There's lots of things about that. And NIST came out with a report, gosh, was it 15 years ago, I guess, that talked about the cost savings if you could find and fix vulnerabilities earlier. And DevOps just kind of adds to that challenge a little bit. But I'd be curious to hear about some of your biggest challenges that you're hoping to get some ideas for today.
Yeah, and I guess just piggybacking on that, what brought you here today, and exactly what Cindy said. What are you trying to get out of it? So it'd be great to hear that too.
Yeah, this is Shyam. I'll go. Personally, I'm really curious to hear from you folks, GitLab, on how some of the organizations are taking the security mechanisms and the protection to be more automated, because we are still largely in the world where, you get some recommendations from QSA, you go through it. It's more of a process driven rather than an automation driven.
Okay.
I guess I can go. So we're actually going through kind of a digital transformation of ourselves, of starting to offer SaaS-based services. And I'm kind of interested in how GitLab can help us, as you were saying, shift left or get to security issues earlier in the process rather than finding them when it's late or too late.
Okay.
Any others? Okay, quiet crowd.
I think this is Nemi from Pacific Dental Services. Very similar to what the first two colleagues said. Just looking to see what the best practices are in freeing up the tools. That's the way I kind of put it. It's security professionals, and I'm from the security. I've never written a code in my life-ish. So we tend to hog on our security tools and, feel very privileged by doing so. So how are people freeing up these tools in the hands of the developers? Because we can talk about shift left all day, but I think if the dev folks are not empowered to do some of the things that are traditionally considered security roles, then that's never really going to happen. So that's kind of what I want to get out of this.
I can probably also add on. So I think for me, when you talk about DevSecOps, one of the challenges I find is in the cloud. If you use Amazon, we use Amazon pretty heavily. It's not very well defined. You have to, there are some tools here and there. Amazon has, some code deploy, code commit, etc. Some things here and there. It's not very well formed. You have to figure things out, as you go. There's a lot of challenges, you gotta hack things around. you have to you talk about security. You need to add, if you're using multiple different tools in the Amazon environment, a lot of that don't integrate very well. I mean, because they've been developed by different groups within Amazon, so they don't talk to each other. It ends up, we being the guinea pigs to try to figure out how it works. I'm not sure how it Microsoft and Google, but I feel it's kind of very similar. So I'm kind of interested to see, how you guys handle the cloud environment and what DevSecOps means when you talk of all these applications from an end-to-end cycle. So that's something I'm interested in learning.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. My name is Kishore. I have a few comments. I've been in the security space for some time, and ours is embedded environment, so the challenges are a little bit different. But I think there should be a balance. Sometimes moving left will probably have a lot more investment to make because you could literally find hundreds or even thousands of issues early on. Are we going to fix all of them? Versus in a educated effort where you probably handle things reactively. Maybe that's one some companies do is, okay, I put so much investment upfront proactively. Is it worth then a reactive when a real issue comes in? I fix it. So, but I think automation is really important, right? The more you move to the left, the more we need to find out how to effectively come up with these vulnerabilities and make the real good ones to fix and do the right trade-off. So I want to hear what tools you have, maybe coverage tools and things like that, static way of finding bugs, dynamic way of finding bugs, so things like that I would like to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay. Any others?
Hey, this is Shri from General Atomics. We are just setting up or getting into the DevOps operations. So we are kind of forming ourselves and trying to get that set up. So I'm looking to learn more related on that topic and how DevSecOps and DevOps interoperate and any structure around that one. So I'm looking to learn from this audience here. Thank you.
Okay. Does everyone kind of share some of these common challenges? Yeah. Okay, well, let me, I'll go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. So let me know if there's any problem seeing my slides.
We're good.
Okay. Got it?
Yeah,
Perfect.
we're able to see it.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to talk about, when we talk about shift left, there's been a lot of discussion in the past about, how do you enable a developer to find and fix vulnerabilities? And there are a lot of different approaches to that. And I talk with customers many times a week, and I do a lot of these roundtable discussions. And so I hear a lot of best practices and what people have tried and different things. And I've also heard some that are kind of scary. Some people have tried to get the developers to use some of the big guns. I would consider like Fortify, Veracode, Synopsys. Those are kind of the big guns. They're meant for security experts, and they're really meant to find everything. But they're really not meant for a developer, and putting it in their hands, I think would probably be a way to alienate your developers pretty quickly. I've heard of other ways of getting development to take more interest. I did a focus group a couple of years back, and I asked developers what they care most about, what gets them excited about security, and what, is it a carrot or a stick? And overwhelmingly, developers don't want to be the one that brought the company down. So they really care, but they really feel like they're not empowered and don't have the tools. So we're going to talk today a little bit about some of the challenges, but some of the, not only the tools, but the processes that make it important that can help you better embed your security into the software development process. Now, application security is hard. It's not like network where, with network security, you stick an appliance on the network and tune it a bit and you're good. The challenge around application security is it's a combination of people, processes, and tools. And you really have to bring all three of those elements together in order to make a difference. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it, and they're not. And, things like patching, if you look at, there's a host of people that do threat reports annually. Fortify used to do one. There's, I think AT&T has one, Verizon, where they look at, what were the most popular exploits. And time again, it's not some whiz bang new thing. For the most part, it's the same old vulnerabilities and the same old exploits that happen over and over and over again because they work and people don't fix them, and patches are hard and patches break things. So, those are, it's a difficult and challenging place on a good day. And now you add in the DevOps element. So, some of you said you're going down that path of DevOps. Even if you're not, you're probably using more agile methodologies and looking for more automation. Well, if you automate a bad process, you're going to get a faster bad process. So you really have to improve the process as you do the automation. And with DevOps, you've got an opportunity to do that because historically, the application security tools have been very expensive. And so what do? Well, you identify your mission critical apps and you lock them down really tight with lots of tests, right? You might do defense in depth and do several different types of scans. And you're going to have an exhaustive list of vulnerabilities and make sure you do the remediation for those mission critical applications. Well, the hackers know that. They're not going to go after a banking application or the healthcare application. They're going to go after your employee application or some marketing thing that somebody did that they said, oh, this is only a temporary thing we're going to use for a little while, so we don't need to worry too much about security. Well, they're going to go in that open window and traverse laterally. So if you're only testing a portion of your code, you're really doing yourself an injustice. And if you think about how do I test all my code, that's really a daunting task. Well, if you're scanning the entire application like you would do traditionally, that is challenging because those scans can take days or weeks to run, and it gets in the way of doing your work. So you've got to think out of the box and think about it a little bit differently. And this is where the square peg and the round hole problem comes in. With traditional application security, if you're doing a monolithic scan of the entire application, that's really challenging to do when the DevOps teams are all about iteration and minimal viable change, minimal viable product. They want to take a smaller bite of code that has significant business value and section that off from all the other changes in this, what would have been a gigantic project. And let's just take this one little change and run it all the way through to production so that you're getting some business value early on. Well, that very small iterative change that means I'm pushing to production, weekly, daily, hourly, really runs head on with that big monolithic application security scan. Now, one added layer that comes into that, Subhash had mentioned AWS and the complexities there. You've got not only your cloud service provider, and they have a bunch of of security configurations that you can, levers that you can pull. But so do containers and orchestrators. APIs bring in a whole new set of things to think about. And so it gets very complicated very quickly to think about how all those different levers work together. And so you need to come at, if you're doing cloud native and cloud and even serverless applications, you need to think about the security a little bit differently, because these things represent new attack surfaces that you didn't otherwise have. I've covered this. So a lot of people are trying to take their security tools and say, okay, I need to integrate it into my DevOps tool chain, into my DevOps process. Where do I draw those lines? Where do I make those integrations? And it gets kind of complex because there's so many tools in most tool chains. I'm sure you recognize some of these logos, and some of you may be using some may be using all. GitLab can do the entire software development lifecycle from end to end. We can do source code management through CI/CD, production monitoring, security, all of that. But it's very rare that somebody has a clean slate to start with, right? So you're usually dealing with some sort of ecosystem that you have. And when you layer in security, if you think about where you need to interface all the different security apps, each one of the security apps is a different product, because Fortify, Veracode, Synopsys, they all grew through acquisitions. So, you've got the static and the dynamic, and you might have a spell checker type functionality. You probably have, everybody's got their favorite single pane of glass. I can't stand that term, but because there's 50 of them. But everybody wants to sell you something to manage all of those scans, even if they're from that vendor. And so you end up with this nasty web of integrations that takes, a full FTE or more to maintain, and it's fragile and so forth. Now, what if you could scan all of the code every time and make it seamless for developers, using fewer tools, not more, in a way that gets dev, sec, and ops all on the same page with a single source of truth, and as icing on the cake, makes your auditors happy? We can help you with that. And there's a different type of process, though, that you have to do in order to make that happen. This is where the out of the box comes in. And by the way, can anybody hear the lawnmower? Because if you can, I'll put on my earphones. No? Okay. So
sounds okay, Cindy.
Okay, thank you. So this is one of my favorite quotes. The CISO at VMware said this, not at last RSA, but the one before. He said, your most important security product won't be a security product. And you know what? He's right. It really comes down to having scans that deliver results into the right place, in the right time, in the right person. And from a process standpoint, in a DevOps environment where you're doing things very quickly, the real key here is doing your application security scans on the feature branch. Now, let me translate that, because I know there's a lot of security folks on the line that may not be familiar with that term. When a developer checks out code from your source code manager, whether it's GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever, most people are using some sort of source code manager these days. When they check that out, it becomes what we call a feature branch. And so that is where I'm going to work on the feature that I'm changing or updating. Okay. So it's separate from that main branch where the main code is stored. I can make whatever changes I want. I can run it, see how it works. And then when I'm happy with it, I merge it back with that main branch, or the trunk, if you will, of the tree. And so if you can run your tests on that feature branch, it's kind of an isolated sandbox, if you will, right? It means I can do this, and I don't have to think about, is the vulnerabilities that are found, are they somebody else's? You get a real clear cause and effect where I made this change. The scan runs as part of my pipeline. It's just a natural byproduct of my pipeline. I see the vulnerabilities and I know that they're mine. I created them and I'm still working on that feature branch. So I'm best equipped to go fix them as well. Now, from a developer standpoint, what it looks like is when you're, the build is automated and they're doing CI and CD and they've got this automated build, it can automatically trigger your application security testing. With GitLab, it's all built in. You can do this with one, with auto DevOps with one command, basically, when you set up the project. And so you get consistency. So every time I commit a piece of code, I'm getting my static analysis, dynamic analysis, container scanning, dependency scanning, license compliance, and I'm scanning for secrets. And all of that's happening while at the point of code commit, when I hit enter basically and say, here's my code, go check it, compile it, if you will, in really old terms. Now you might wonder, how do you run DAST that early? How does DAST happen for the developer? Because you need a fully functioning app. Well, because your security is embedded in CI, GitLab spins up a review app, and that it's an ephemeral application that reflects the changes that you made, and we run the dynamic scan against that. So the developer can get all of those results right there at the point of code commit. Now, I just have to bring this up because we had so much press over our acquisition last week. I just want to mention this too, because fuzz testing is another thing that people are starting to add, but it's complicated, and you know, you don't want to have a PhD to figure out how to run this additional kind of testing. But fuzz testing finds unknown types of vulnerabilities. So you've got your known ones, you know, CVEs for those, and we know what they are. We'll look for those, and then you've got unknown. This finds unknown and also errors in business logic. So it's a little bit of kind of throwing random things at your application to see what breaks. And so we're building that into this pipeline. So you'll have fuzz testing in here as well. You don't have to know how to figure it out to set it up. It will run automatically and be one more type of defense in-depth scan. Again, that will give the results to the developer in a language that's meant for the developer, not just for security. So from a workflow standpoint, what this means is I get a very tight iterative process that matches or mirrors my DevOps process. So the developer makes a code change, they hit commit, it runs the pipeline, which essentially compiles it, makes sure there's not any syntax errors, those kinds of things, but it also runs for security scans. Gives the results to the developer right in their hands, in their workflow. They don't have to change to a different tool. And at that point, they can choose to take a couple different actions when they find a vulnerability. So they can fix it. We give them information about how to fix it and why it's important to fix it, and links to go look for more information. So ideally, you'd want them to fix it. Then by the time it gets to security and merged back into the master branch, you'll have a lot fewer vulnerabilities to deal with. The other thing is I can create an issue. Let's say it's going to take a while to make this change and I just don't have time in this sprint, but I don't want to let it escape. So I'm going to capture it as an issue with one click that I can come back to later. The other thing I could do is dismiss it. Now that always raises the hackles of the security folks that I'm talking to, but here's the beauty of it. If a developer dismisses it, it may be for a legitimate reason. They may have a compensating control. It may be, maybe they say, oh, it's a test database, I don't really care, whatever. They may have a legitimate reason. You may not agree with their reason, okay? But when they dismiss it, it doesn't go away. It just sets it aside so that anyone else working on that project doesn't have to deal with that same vulnerability over and over and over again every time they do a code commit. Okay, so it means that you can set that aside, but security can come back and check those out. And it's all contextual. So I'll show you here in a minute. You can see what was going on. The security person and the developer can both see the same thing. So you get everybody on the same page. Now, here's the merge request or the CI pipeline, if you will, for that the developer is just, this is part of their native workflow. This is what they're working in and day out. And they're going to see their security scan results right here and can deal with them right here without changing tools. You can also set it up where, you know, if it's a critical vulnerability, it requires approval or what have you. So you can automate your policies so that the security team can spend more time focusing on what should the policies be. And actually, that one's really important because when you do automation, here's another piece of advice. If you automate your policies and you find that your policy is causing the security tools to break every pipeline, you probably ought to revisit your policies. It's not to say that they are too tight, but it may be that when you weren't automated, people were getting exceptions. And if everybody was going after exceptions and it wasn't documented real well and real clearly and visibly, then maybe you really weren't enforcing those policies to begin with. So just food for thought there. But so after the developer does this iterative process, gets it where they're comfortable with the code, they're going to merge it back with that main branch. And that's when the security team can get involved and see on a dashboard. And the security person can look at a project level, at a group of projects, or at the whole instance across, across the company, and see what's going on. So you get visibility as a security person. You get visibility much earlier than you would normally. So normally you would wait until the testing would happen in a test environment. And you know, there's been, it's much further down in the process. Well, here you get that early visibility into your critical vulnerabilities. And so you can help, help prioritize those or help the developer understand how to resolve them. And we give you a risk view that says, you know, here's your riskiest projects to really focus on and pay attention to. And in fact, one of the things we're looking at adding is that risk view back here for that individual developer, where we'd say, not only has it found these vulnerabilities, but here's the ones that are most, present the most risk to your organization based upon have they ever been exploited, those kinds of things. Now, the reason why this workflow is so critical and important is it's all about simplicity and integration. You're meeting the developers on their territory, on their turf. There will always be more developers than there are security people. So if you can arm them with the tools that they need to find and fix vulnerabilities, that integration always wins. If you think about, you know, your cell phone, how many of you carry a camera anymore? You don't, right? You save your camera for maybe wedding pictures and usually a professional photographer, but you've got your cell phone camera with you all the time. And the reason why that wins is I don't have to go look for something to read my flash drive from my camera. I don't have to find something that's connected to the internet. My phone always is. And I don't have to find something that will interface with my social media to share my pictures. And so, you know, if you think about it from that same standpoint, that's what we believe will work in terms of scaling your application security. You've got to build it into the CI process. Now, a couple people had mentioned, things like cloud services and I don't know if somebody mentioned containers, but that would be part probably of your SaaS and your digital transformation. I wrote a book last year that goes into these topics in more depth. You'll be sent this as a follow-up and a thank you for participating. You can also get it on the O'Reilly Learning Library. That goes into a lot more of those topics in greater depth. But what I want to do now is I want to change gears here and go back to faces and talk about, you know, what challenges do you all have? You know, before we talk about what doesn't work, maybe let's talk about what does work. So like, what is the one most impactful step that you've taken in your journey towards shifting left? And I'll throw one out there to start with, because it doesn't have to be tool related. I heard this at another roundtable from a marquee customer. You'd all recognize their name. I don't think I can say the name, but it was a really cool thing. They have their bug bounties funded not by their security team, but by their business application owners. So if bugs are found, it's the, you know, VP of whatever application area that pays the bounty. So now they're suddenly very incented to find security vulnerabilities before the hackers do on for the bug bounties. But anyway, I thought that one was brilliant, and I like to share that because it is, again, kind of a little bit of out of the box thinking. But so what's been your most impactful step that you've taken in your journey? It can be anything, people, process, technology. And I'm going to put on my earphones because it's raining really hard and I'm having a hard time hearing now.
Hi, this is Jeff French from New American Funding. So I'm rather new in this role, been here about 6 months and completely developing a security program. So unfortunately, I haven't had much time to focus on any shift left, but I am in the early stages. So this is definitely more of a learning experience than what my peers are doing.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Hey, this is Shri. So one of the things we just started doing on our environment is, I mean, we run major ERP systems, which are kind of the code is proprietary within the ERPs. So we are just implemented or started running their own vulnerability checks on the code. And we're starting to look into code scanners for other non-ERP related platforms. So any thoughts on that one? I mean, we know there are open source tools available which will scan, for example, like Oracle Apex applications. Any thoughts from that perspective?
So we use a lot of open source scanners ourselves under the covers. What we're doing though is the important thing is not just the scanner, but making sure that you're getting the scan results to the developer. So they're probably doing some integration work. You know, you're dealing with APIs. You want to make sure that you're testing and scanning your APIs as well. But does anyone else have some advice for Shri?
I've got a question for Shri. I found what you said interesting. When you talk about scanners, so scanners is clearly a big word, right? Scanners, analyzers, whatever you call them. Are there particular types of defects or vulnerabilities that you're looking for, Shri, or is it more to comply with, for example, a no new defects type of policy?
Kind of that included. I don't know how much you guys know about my organization. Briefly, I mean, you can gather it from our web portal. but we are a defense organization, so security is kind of on the top of the list. So we are kind of dictated by our security, cybersecurity policies. So we run various vulnerability checks across our physical environment, so to speak. So network scans and everything else we do for intrusions and stuff like that. So that's outside of the development teams, but we are now trickling down to any exposure in our code. So that's where we started looking into code exposures and vulnerability in that as we foray into DevOps and are getting more into kind of like a public domain. So we wanted to make sure that we are protected from that perspective. So we run an SAP shop. So SAP is essentially self-contained application shop. So they provide their own CVA, code vulnerability analysis tool, wherein it runs a scan and it branches off into various results, and you analyze that. It's still pretty, it's not fully automated, but it is, I guess it's a start. But we are looking into various other platforms where it's outside of SAP. And given that it's an engineering company, it's not just IT which does development. Essentially spread across the company. We have outside of IT domain, we have engineers writing code all the time. We build unmanned aircrafts. A lot of programming goes into that more than even IT does. So how do we ensure that the code which the engineers are building are scanned and how they are protected from vulnerability? So we have to also be able to go to them and provide them options on how they can protect the company in general. So I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question, but we are kind of getting into this space. And so that's where I'm looking for is any thoughts on this or any ideas. And it could be even an offline conversation later.
There are some, oh, sorry, Yu-Chen, go ahead.
No, you're okay. No, go ahead, Cindy.
There are some people that are taking more of a preventative approach, where things like having a pre-approved bill of materials where you can only select third-party code or dependencies from that pre-approved list, or hardened containers. In fact, I think for the defense industry, or Fed at least, we've got a white paper that just came out about hardened containers, so we could get that over to you if that's something of interest.
Yeah, that will be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Shri, do you mind if I just ask you one more quick thing? Because something you said that really caught my ear. And since Cindy disclosed at the beginning, she used to work with HP Fortify, I'll disclose I've worked with Coverity, and I also worked at Clockwork. And when I was at Clockwork, I was the military aerospace vertical. So what I saw in that space was a couple of trends, which I think you may be experiencing already or may expect to experience. One of them was, the tools were being used, as Cindy said at the top, to find all sorts of defects. I mean, I guess the focus is mostly on severes, meaning CVSS 7, 8, 9s, and criticals, meaning CVSS 10s. But certainly there was a deep scrub done. And one of the things that was really tricky about the military aerospace sector is there were certain milestones where once you're past a certain one, even if you find a really severe defect, it's very difficult to go back and remediate that before you have to do the release, right? So that was one dynamic I observed. The other one is there was an increasing use of open source technologies as folks embraced the broader ecosystem that you're doing right now. So the changes I saw were kind of twofold. One is that's a lot of where the shift left mentality came from, because it's just easier and to remediate when you can find something at the change set level. Say I'm a developer on Cindy's team, I submit a change, it contains a defect. Cindy gets to approve or reject my change before it even goes into the code base. So that's one paradigm shift I saw. The other one is the rise of, I guess, what are called software composition analysis scanners today, meaning not only is the consumption of open source components at the application level, it's something like 80% of your application, of the average application, enterprise or otherwise, is open source components, which basically gives malicious actors a whole lot of targets to go after once they exploit a single vulnerability. So I saw the rise of integration of some of those tools to identify CVEs associated with open source libraries and also risky licensing. For example, AGPL, which assumes that all web endpoints are distribution endpoints and can trigger some legal liabilities, or GPL would be the other popular one. So those were the two trends I saw in the military aerospace sector. Are those things that you've seen happen, for yourself?
I'll be honest here. I am not sure because we are kind of new into this arena right now, and we have what really happens within the engineering workspace. I'm from the IT, so and some of it is pretty classified information. Even IT doesn't get privy to. So I don't have a real answer for you, unfortunately. But what I'm essentially looking for is some, and maybe that white paper Cindy mentioned about could be a good start, is to glean some knowledge from the experts here within this webinar and take it back within the team.
Yeah, I think one thing you may need is security development lifecycle process that goes in parallel with your development process.
Yeah, all those things needs to be stood up in our organization. But the problem is it's not a centralized development environment, if you understand what I mean. There are products being built all across the company for various engineering divisions.
Yeah, kind of along those lines, how do people deal with outsourced development shops and ensuring that they're doing best practices?
Any thoughts on best practices there?
Do you have them leverage your tools? Do you ensure that they have their own and then do code reviews at the end?
I think you should never rely on them. You should recheck everything.
So one thing that's nice about GitLab is if you have them using GitLab, everything is captured in terms of like who changed what, where, when. And sorry for the distraction there. And so you can track like who approved. If you had, say, a vulnerability that required approval, who approved it, why, when, the pipeline they were looking at. So that's why auditors love us. So I could see you using that from an outsourcing standpoint as well to keep up with your external developers to make sure that they're also following the policies that you want followed, because your policies represent your risk appetite. And so you'd want them to follow the same policies that you do.
Makes complete sense, thanks.
Cindy, would you agree that, oh, sorry. I want to ask Cindy, would you agree that applies to mergers and acquisitions as well for products that are acquired?
Sure. Yeah, it's an easy way to any part of your supply chain where you need to manage your risk, that sort of visibility can be helpful.
Sunit, Experian. I was wondering how GitLab compares to some of the other scanning methods like IAST, and where this would be beneficial versus IAST.
So IAST was invented as a means of trying to do dynamic scanning earlier and more interactively with the developer. So we believe that the developer needs to be engaged, but we do it in a little bit different way. So instead of doing IAST, our DAST kind of replaces the need for IAST because you're doing a dynamic scan, but you're doing it early and interactive with the developer as part of their CI pipeline. And you don't have to instrument the app.
Okay, thanks.
So just, I guess we don't have, do we have a way of doing show of hands? We don't necessarily. Maybe just kind of round robin. I'd be curious to know what kinds of testing y'all are using between static, dynamic. A few of you mentioned that you're moving towards what I would consider most likely containerized applications. How many of you are scanning your containers?
Yeah, we are. This is Gorky. I'm from Quest Diagnostics. Hi. Can you hear me, Cindy?
Yeah. So you're scanning your containers.
Yeah, so we are scanning containers, and also like we actually implemented the tool called shift left on our GitLab, for every pull request. So, so we are doing the code scanning as well, right, with every pull request and all that too. Mm-hmm. So the container scanning, it's like the corporate security group have tools, like, so they run all their tools on the containers. Again, the shift left also, like, we mirror our repository. So they actually run it like in parallel. So on a mirror repository. So not on a feature branch, but on a mirror. So that's how we're doing it right now for some of our projects.
Okay. Anybody else? Maybe no one wants to admit that they're not doing, that they're not scanning their containers. How about APIs? What are you all doing for APIs? Is that something that keeps you up at night, or do you feel like you've got that covered?
I mean, yeah, we have like, mostly like, our APIs, behind the firewall, like on the DMZ, and, we only expose like very little and few APIs outside. And, the security teams, they do the scanning of those as well too, like, with their tools, like actually the development engineering teams, they're not involved in those scans. It's up to the security teams, like, so they do, and they give us a vulnerability report and stuff, then we take care of the patching those. Yeah, that's been what we've been doing.
I see API as kind of like COVID testing. Once you start testing for it, then you have a problem.
Yeah, it is, right? So, and a lot of these APIs, yeah, we do this for COVID testing. Actually, my team's launched all the tests. So, yes.
So if you don't test, you don't know that you have problems. So you just
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, you need to test it, right? So, yeah.
That's funny. Not well. I don't know. It's kind of sad, but funny.
Yeah. So we have like, of course, we're in healthcare. Code is one thing, but yeah, we have a lot of sensitive data, like, genetics and genomics and all that. We do a lot of other things that people are not aware of. So we do like whole genome sequencing and all that stuff. So we have to keep the security is a very high priority. So we try to expose as little as possible to the outside. And again, but again, it's the security teams, they take care of whatever is exposed, because even before we had to expose an API outside, like, it goes through like multiple levels of audits and through all the security, teams, and they run their tools on even before we launch them outside internally and find all the vulnerabilities. then only like it goes live, you know, outside of firewall, if anything is going on, outside the firewalls and the DMZ. So that's how I handle it. Yeah.
And let's see, Jeremy, you mentioned digital transformation. What's your biggest struggle there in terms of securing? You mentioned SaaS environments.
Yeah, so we have a couple of issues, I guess not issues, challenges. So we have both outsourced development and in-house development, globally dispersed, different environments, and also basically trying to come up to speed from a security department on what to look for from a security perspective and how to manage these digital products. Some of them are serverless, some of them have compute, and then development is again, some of it's done outside and some of it's done inside. So what is the right blend of a security department to kind of enable what we want to do, which is citizen development, but that's easier said by a CIO than it is when the head of security then has to respond and secure it, right? So that's our challenge right now.
How are you doing managing the outsourced development from a security standpoint?
Yeah, so up until this point, we've done a lot of kind of static code analysis before things go to production. But obviously, as you get into more of a cloud-based world, a point in time snapshot or security is obviously not ideal. So yeah, we are looking at options around this area.
Cheyenne,
you kind of expand it to just more than just code, right? So configuration management, et cetera, around these kind of products. And once you do that, there's all these different things you need to know about a SaaS product. And there's no central way of doing that, right? So it's kind of tooling things together and having a security team kind of building a security ecosystem around a SaaS product. So it's kind of one of the challenges that we're going through right now.
Is SaaS the only type of scanning that you're doing?
No, I mean, we have plenty of internal applications as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's been several attacks over the last year or so that have, Capital One comes to mind. It was an insider deal, but they took advantage of a misconfiguration. You know, when you think about all those different levers you can pull between your cloud service provider and your containers and your orchestrators, it's not surprising that some things can be misconfigured pretty easily. And so I would say, look, in the future, look towards tools that will help with that. I don't think there's a lot of good choices out there right now. We're actually working on that problem, but it's a big problem to solve because there's so many parts to it. But my prediction is that misconfiguration might become as big a deal as not patching at some point in terms of exploits.
Yeah, there was a study done, I forget which one, where misconfiguration was the #1 cause of breaches with cloud products right now. I mean, if you look at Capital One, you could consider that a misconfiguration, right? I mean, there was some inside knowledge, but at the end of the day, if someone didn't have that knowledge and was able to figure it out, they would have.
Mm. Yep. So Subhash, you had mentioned AWS and that challenges in figuring out all the different pieces there. Have we hit on the scope of the problem, or does it go beyond that?
Yeah, I think some of them you kind of mentioned in your talk, but I think one of the things I see is that you talk about security, I mean, yeah, they have, Amazon does have roles and privileges and other things, but from a CI/CD perspective, it's not very tight, coupled together. Everything is left for you to fend on your own, especially when they release new applications, which is pretty often you don't find them integrated into the platform in a very cohesive manner. So you end up doing things which, one of a better word, it does not is not very standard. So you can have hack things around, kind of try to figure things around. So that's one of the challenges I see. And one of the reasons is that happens is because they are very agile. They kind of bring products to market really fast, but there is no standardization or quality in how the whole framework is being built. So it has pros and cons. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do like the flexibility that it offers, but it also has challenges in that you really can't build a truly scalable framework if you try to hodgepodge all of these tools together without having a well-defined knowledge base.
Yeah, that's where automation can help, because you can standardize and pick your policies and then enforce them with all of the projects. It's challenging if every project can do their own thing.
I mean, it is true automation can help, but if you're going to do standardization, I mean, one of the benefits of moving to the cloud is it allows you to be more flexible and quick and nimble to use different tools as they come. When you have a data scientist, data analyst, want to try different things. If you keep saying, this is standard, there's going to be pushback. So you have to also be careful about what you can and cannot do. I do agree standards are important and we need to have those in place, but at some point you also have to be flexible enough to allow for tools that may not be part of your current platform, but have some mechanism to uh, to automate it or even create some kind of security around it. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I would say everything in security is a risk-based approach, right? You have to choose your battles.
Subhash, mind if I ask you a quick question? Since you've been the heaviest on AWS thus far, when you think about AWS, and I agree, it's got a lot of really cool features, but cobbling them together when you're talking about zero trust security, that gets just a couple of degrees tougher, right? Are your challenges more around, say, applications or infrastructure? I suppose it's a mix of both, but is there one that's kind of a little scarier or a little more risky than the other?
You're right. It is a mix of both. I guess I would say infrastructure. I mean, no, infrastructure not so much, but the new tooling infrastructure, the new tools that come out. Some of them which are well defined, Kubernetes, containers, so pretty much have some standards which you can always plug and play and run with it. Things when you start looking at SageMaker, Glue, we're heavily focused on data. So for us, data security is very paramount. So how do you integrate data? Because infrastructure security is one piece, data security is another piece, and that comes down to the level of who has access to what data, how granular you can get with that data, how who touches it, and the other aspect is data is located in several different places. So it's not just we have this concept of a data lake, and we kind of use S3 as that, but then we also have Redshift, we have Snowflake, we have Postgres, Oracle, 10 different areas where you have data located. So security has to go across it. And now you also bring into things like data governance. How do you have one source of truth? How do you ensure security is across the board, visible, ensuring that you ask a question across all these tools, they give you back the same answer no matter what. So it gets very, very challenging when you look at all these tools and you try to bring them together. There is no easy answer. Even Amazon does not have an answer today. Pretty much you are left to fend on your own, try to figure things out on your own. My feeling is other cloud providers are kind of the same boat. It's all about being nimble and being open to your customers' feedback, and providing all the new tool sets rather than standardizing and growing that infrastructure in a much more what do you call holistic framework.
So have you thought about what it would look like to solve that problem? Like, would that be like setting policies in something that's more English language like, and then that translates it out to the different tools? Or would that be something that guides you through the AWS settings? Have you thought how that might
I have,
work?
yeah, I have. I've been thinking about this for years. Data governance is a problem that it happens across the board in multiple industries. It's not easy problem to solve. Give you an example. CCPA currently it's active in the California market, and basically and you have to make sure your users' requirements are sufficiently encrypted and isolated, and if ever a request comes to delete some data, you need to delete it across the board. That is challenging in the sense that if you have data located in multiple places, how do you do that very through one system? It is not it is, I wouldn't say it's not feasible, it is not easy. That's what I would say to that point. Because for one thing is data can be transformed, it can be transmuted, it can change over time. So you need to also, if you have a lineage of how your data is transformed, you have to go back to the source, see where the data is, change that out.
If you think though about how, so the application is what would transform the data. I'm not dismissing the need for data security at all, but from a software development lifecycle standpoint, if you can automate your software development lifecycle and implement policies that protect not only the quality of the code that's produced, but the access to that code, make sure that somebody's not, an unauthorized person is not changing the code to do other things on your data than what it should. I think you can go a long way through your development life cycle.
But that's all dependent if the code is the only way that people access the data. That's not true because in most cases you have multiple ways of accessing data. Some could be through Tableau interface, some come directly through a SQL query, some can come in through a third-party application. So code is, I agree with you. If you have one source of truth that can make that happen, problem today, having one source of truth is really hard.
Yeah. Well, from an application security standpoint, I want to get back to things that a couple of the other folks have said here too. Shyam had mentioned automation, and you wanted to understand automation. I'm curious about what you've tried and what works, what doesn't. What challenges do you foresee in the automation?
Yeah, I think, both it's a people, process plus tech kind of a concern or a challenge, right? One of the things that we have done from a people standpoint is definitely have the DevOps and the security engineers merge into one team. And we're obviously looking at upskilling the security engineers who typically are tool users to be more programmatic security engineers. So thinking through on how they can pair up with the developers. It is from a process standpoint, I think the challenges are first, there isn't one standard way to plug in an OWASP or any kind of DAST recommendations into one tool in your CI/CD pipeline. And that's one challenge. The other is, you get additional noise. What do you do once you get some sort of alerts? How we are reacting to those? The pipeline that you showed kind of reflects the ideal state, right? But how do you implement it, both in your process-wise as well as skills-wise? those are the challenges. I mean, like to your other question about the container scanning, we are on Google Cloud. We have the Google Cloud inbuilt container scanning working for us, and that works fine until April. And when we realize that from April they start charging for container scanning, so it's additional bill as part of your cloud operations, but not a big deal. It's one of those things that you have to be mindful of.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about on the remediation side, some parts of that can be automated as well, so that when you do find the vulnerabilities, because you're right, finding them is only half the problem, right? The other half the problem is fixing them.
Yeah.
There's a couple things come to mind. So one is some tools can automatically remediate. So for instance, if you find an open source vulnerability and there's a more current version available,
mm-hmm.
you could download that. And like I said, some tools will automatically download that. Where we're getting to is, because it's embedded in CI, is actually running that against a separate feature branch, because patching, if patching were easy, everybody would do it, right? But patching breaks stuff.
Yeah.
So run it on a separate branch, see if it works, see if it's clean and it doesn't break anything. And if it is, then fine, merge that in. But if it's not, then you've saved yourself some headache.
Correct.
But that, so that's an example of auto remediation. But another thing would be, if you can empower the developers to remove the vulnerabilities while they're iterating on the code, then you've got a whole lot less work at the end in terms of managing the remaining vulnerabilities and tracking them back. I think security teams spend so much effort triaging vulnerabilities and trying to figure out, okay, who can fix this, and getting it on their sprint, getting it prioritized to actually be done. So if you think through the automation of, can I easily create an issue for vulnerabilities that haven't been resolved? And then do I have the visibility into that without going to 10 different systems and reports and whatever? How easy is it for me to see that vulnerability represents some level of risk? And so I need to periodically assess my risk. I need to see, has it been resolved, without going back to dev and saying, has it been resolved? Has it been resolved? Has it been resolved? Right? Nobody likes to do that. So that would be, from an automation standpoint, something to think through on the back end downstream side.
Yeah, and there are some things that the tools tell you what they are. It's your choice whether you want to break the build or you want to continue on with the build, and that's a discipline thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nemi, you had mentioned freeing up tools for developers. Tell me a little bit more about what that means. What challenge you have around that? Okay, maybe Nemi stepped away. And Keisha, it's not here. Okay, somebody else has stepped away too. Well, someone had mentioned, what do you do when you find 1,000 vulnerabilities very early? How do the developers deal with that? If you can do this scanning iteratively, you're only scanning the code that changed. So you can be very iterative and probably not find as many vulnerabilities in one chunk. It makes it easier to kind of, what's the saying? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Easier to kind of churn through those. Curious if anybody else has some experience there. What do you do when you find thousands of vulnerabilities early?
you would prioritize them based on the criticality and the business needs and the impact from a security perspective, from my standpoint.
So the security team would be involved to do the prioritization?
Yeah, it would be the security folks that would be involved along with the business owner as well, because part of the issue is that, you know, when it comes to the security aspect, is it's about educating the business on the risks if they went ahead and let it move forward. Mm-hmm. That's kind of typically how I would handle it, that type of situation.
Then once you've done that prioritization, how do you follow up? What steps do you take to make sure that those things get remediated?
Typically what I would do is I would work with the development team and the architecture folks and see about the approach of fixing them, because sometimes when you've got thousands of vulnerabilities, they may be interrelated. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the code. And I would have the conversation and kind of say, hey, let's talk about potential release schedules, you know, kind of aligning it to the DevSecOps type of model where, hey, you take care of the first high priority chunk and then you move forward like that.
Mm-hmm. What do you have to do to find out how they're resolving it? Like if they've added it to a sprint or a milestone, and if it's being worked on, how do you go about finding that?
Typically what I would do is I would put that in part of the testing and verification process, because I know several folks stated earlier on this call is that you've got to check and verify whether it be a third party outsourced provider or an internal developer.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have any suggestions on how to simplify the remediation from a security standpoint? Quiet group.
Can I ask a follow-on question to that, Cindy? Just out of curiosity, does anyone here simply use the word inject, but there's probably a better word, inject security findings directly back into the developer's backlog and have the dev team do the initial triage via, say, you know, Jira or GitLab issues or whatever your ticketing system is? Anyone using that approach? Because I see, I've been on both sides. I've been the security person that comes over with the big spreadsheet full of findings. I've also been the developer who, frankly, wrote some defective code, and I had to go through a triage session where we ended up in some pretty interesting debates between dev and security, right? Which typically went, hey, no, this isn't an issue. I wrote the code. I thought about this. We don't have exposure, whereas the security folks are like, hey, no, this is actually a problem. So there is often a negotiation process, but increasingly, as I've seen, a number of developers just become more security conscious. So I was curious if anyone's going straight back into the dev backlog.
For me, we do kind of a mix where development, there is some in-house development, but also we rely on a lot of external vendor-built products. And so typically what we try to do is we utilize a typical intake, which in most of our vendors' cases is Jira, and we try to leverage other customers of the vendors if it's a vendor third-party built application. Otherwise, it's a discussion with the development team.
Anybody else? It's a really interesting idea, Yu-Chen, in terms of security, vetting and cleaning up the list before it goes to dev versus give it all to dev and let them look at it and figure it out. Anybody doing that latter approach other than Christy? Okay, well, maybe we need to mention some of the goodies that we have, Robert, to get people awake again. You want to tell them about I mentioned the book, so as a thank you, you'll get an email with a link to the ebook, but Robert's got some goodies as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely everybody should enjoy Cindy's book. I haven't read it yet, but now that I've decided on a session, I'm going to have to get a copy and read it myself. I'm looking forward to that. Also, let's see, everybody should have got should get an email from Lily Phillips. So what we've done is we're giving you a gift card for dinner for your family. It's $60 with Grubhub, and please enjoy that for participating today in the session. And we really appreciate you guys coming, and spend that wisely with your family and stay safe out there.
I'll jump in real quick, actually, Robert, if that's okay. One of the great things that GitLab does actually with their giveaway is, and of course, everybody enjoy a great meal, Grubhub all the way. However, they do have a very cool option. It's a program called Thanks, without an A, but you'll see it in their follow-up. So you can choose to either utilize the funds for your dinner for your family, or to donate to one of the charities that they'll be sending out. So super cool option. I think it's awesome that they use that organization called Thanks. Yeah, so I think that's great. I'll say, Cindy, thanks for leading a great session. Thanks for pushing some conversation, and I think it was really great to hear from a number of people here. We will follow up, and just so you all know who is here, and hopefully you guys can connect with each other post, but I'm sure GitLab will follow up as well with that gift and the ebook, and hope that everybody enjoyed themselves. Robert, Yu-Chen, and Cindy, thank you so much for hosting.
Thanks, Becky.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Bye. Thank you for the gifts. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye. Oh, I was on a call. I'm done.
Yeah, me too.